My brother Calvin laughed when I was left behind in the rain, suitcase soaked, but now I'm the one sitting at the head of the table he thought was his forever. At 29, I'd always been the quiet, overlooked one in our Ohio family, working 2 jobs as a waitress and clerk to pay my way through community college, never asking for handouts, while Calvin, at 31, soaked up the praise and cash like a sponge. That night, after dinner at our parents' house, everyone piled into cars for the annual siblings trip to the lake. Mom, Dad, Calvin, his girlfriend, all laughing and waving. I stood at the edge of the driveway, ready with my bag, but Calvin rolled down the window from the driver's seat. "Guess there's not enough room for you, Elena. Don't wait up." His girlfriend's cackle joined his as the taillights faded into the storm, leaving me drenched and alone. His laughter echoed like a slap that stung long after the rain stopped. I stood there, water pooling at my feet, whispering to myself, never again. The humiliation burned hot, but it sparked something colder, a plan to flip the script. Just before you continue to watch, Feminine Revenge would like you to subscribe to this channel and like this video. It would encourage us to keep this streak of thrilling revenge stories for you to watch. Alright, back to the story. When I got home that night, my small apartment was dark and silent, like a mirror reflecting my spot in the family, always on the edge, never center. I peeled off wet clothes, the chills sinking into my bones, and scrolled through social media on my phone. There they were, photos popping up already, cocktails clinking, beach smiles under sunset filters, hashtags like #FamilyLove and #BestTripEver. My name was never mentioned, not even a tag or thought. Calvin's post showed him arm around his girlfriend, caption, "Living our best lives," like I didn't exist. The sting hit harder than the rain, tears mixing with the damp on my face. I'd scraped by for years, sending birthday cards and checks when I could barely afford rent, while he got the big gifts and praise. Being left behind wasn't new, but this time it broke something loose inside me. I clenched my phone tight and said out loud, "If they won't give me a seat, I'll build my own table." Resolve hardened like clay in fire. Tomorrow, I'd start climbing, quiet but sure. This wasn't the first time Calvin had left me behind, his laughter echoing like a slap that stung long after the sound faded. Growing up in our Ohio home, it had always been this way, the favoritism wrapped in love that looked fair from afar but cut deep up close. Calvin got the big bedroom with the window view, while I squeezed into the tiny one by the noisy street. He got the shiny new bike for Christmas, pedaling off with friends, while I rode his old hand-me-down with rusted chains. Our parents praised his B's like gold stars, but scolded my A's for not trying harder. When I got accepted into community college on scholarships I'd scraped for, they shrugged and said, "At least Calvin's at stayed on full ride. He's the one going places." The wound festered quiet, a scar I never dared poke at, fearing it'd bleed out the family glue holding us. But that night in the rain, suitcase heavy as my heart, the old hurts bubbled up like poison from a well. Being left behind wasn't new, but this time it broke the dam. I realized I had spent my whole life waiting for permission to shine, and I was done waiting, ready to seize the light myself. I started small the very next week, signing up for night classes in business management at the local community college, paying with tips for my diner shifts that left my feet aching but my mind hungry. Every hour behind the counter slinging coffee and burgers became fuel for my ambition, each dollar tucked away like bricks for a wall no one could knock down. Calvin called once, mocking my little hobby over the phone, his laugh sharp as knives. "Good luck with that, Elena. Real success takes more than books." People at work laughed too when I mentioned it, patting my back like I was a kid with big dreams. Cute, but stick to what you know. But they didn't know each book was a weapon, each lecture a sharpening stone honing my edge sharper than before. I studied late under a dim lamp, notes piling like plans for a takeover. One professor, Mr. Hayes, leaned in after class one night, his eyes serious over half-moon glasses. "You've got a gift for this, Elena, numbers, strategy, the whole package. Don't waste it on small thinking." His words lit a fire in my chest, hot and steady. I knew then this was my path to the table's head. I started small a week after that rainy night, signing up for night classes in business management at the local community college, paying with tips from my diner shifts that left my feet sore, but my resolve ironclad. Every hour slinging plates and pouring coffee became fuel for my ambition, each dollar tucked away like seeds for a garden no one saw coming. The classes were tough, balancing books after midnight shifts, jotting notes while my eyes burned from lack of sleep. Calvin texted once, mocking my little school project. Good luck with that, Elena. Real success doesn't come from classrooms. His laugh echoed in my mind, but I ignored it, focusing on lectures about investments, marketing, and flipping properties. People at work chuckled when I mentioned it over lunch. Cute dream, but stick to reality. But their doubts only sharpened my edge. They didn't know each book was a weapon, each assignment a step up a ladder they couldn't see. One professor, Mr. Hayes, leaned in after class one evening, his eyes serious over his glasses. You've got a gift for this, Elena. Numbers flow through you like water. Don't waste it on small thinking. His words lit a spark in my chest, hot and steady. I confessed I'd been laid off from my second job at the clothing store during a chance chat with an old regular at the diner, Mr. Clark, who turned out to be a real estate investor nursing his coffee black. Times are tough, I said, wiping down his table, my voice steady despite the ache in my chest from Calvin's latest dig. He studied me for a long moment, his eyes narrowing like he saw something hidden. We're hiring people who know the field inside out. Admin, scouting deals. Come by Monday for an interview. My heart skipped like a stone on calm water. Finally, someone valued my experience, the years I'd juggled jobs while Calvin coasted on charm. I showed up that Monday in my best blouse, nerves buzzing, and nailed the questions with details from my classes. They hired me on the spot as an assistant, a foot in the door to something bigger. I didn't yet realize this was the very company Calvin dreamed of working for, the one he'd bragged about at dinners before laughing me off. Fate had just placed me on his path, a quiet twist sharper than any revenge I'd plotted yet. At Thanksgiving, the family gathered around the long oak table in our parents' Ohio home, the air thick with turkey scent and laughter that felt like knives to my chest. Calvin sat at the head like he owned the room, bragging about a business idea he wanted funded, a flashy app for local deals that sounded like another quick scheme. Everyone nodded approvingly, Mom beaming as she passed the gravy, Dad slapping his back with pride. That's my boy, always thinking big, Dad said, eyes shining like Calvin was the sun itself. When the talk turned to me, I mentioned buying my duplex quietly, the one I'd scraped for with diner tips and late nights studying. Calvin laughed so hard he nearly spilled his wine, choking on his mashed potatoes as tears streamed from his eyes. Elena's playing Monopoly with real houses now, he howled, the table roaring along like it was the funniest joke ever told. Mom chuckled nervously. Dad grinned wide, no one defending me as usual. I forced a smile, cheeks burning hot as coals, but inside, rage boiled like water ready to burst the pot. I promised myself he'd choke on that laughter one day, his mockery turning to dust in his throat. The seed of revenge rooted deeper that night, growing wild in the dark. Clark introduced me to other investors at a networking event downtown, men and women in sharp suits who weren't afraid to take chances on underdogs like me. Elena's got the eye for deals, he said, clapping my shoulder as he passed me around like a prized find. I worked twice as hard after that, showing up to meetings with spreadsheets ready, questions sharp as tacks. They tested me at first, small flips, risky rentals in rough neighborhoods, but I earned their trust with quick wins, turning dumps into dollars. Soon, I wasn't just buying property, I was developing it, knocking down walls to build apartments that rented fast. My name started showing up in local business articles, rising star in Ohio real estate, headlines that made my phone buzz with calls. Calvin saw one at a family lunch, snorting like it was a joke. Photoshop, he teased, but his eyes narrowed sharp. I smiled sweet, letting it slide. One morning, as I sipped coffee over a new contract, my mother called, her voice hesitant through the line. Elena, Calvin says you're exaggerating about this real estate stuff. Is it true? You're really doing all that? Her doubt stung, but it fueled a fire, proving them wrong one brick at a time. Within weeks of Madison starting at the firm, she had half the office convinced I was slipping, her whispers spreading like ink in water, staining reputations with every casual chat. She orchestrated the gossip so well, starting small in break room talks. Elaine's experienced, but these new tools?
She struggles sometimes.
People I'd mentored for years began avoiding my desk, their eyes sliding away like they carried secrets too heavy to share. I overheard one intern in the copy room telling another, "She's too old school. Madison's the future, fresh and sharp." The words stung like paper cuts, sharp and unexpected, drawing blood from my pride without a single drop showing. But they also fueled me, turning hurt into a slow-burning resolve, hot as coals under ash. Madison's arrogance shone through her smiles, thinking she could erase me without a fight, her youth a weapon she'd wield with glee. Let her think she was winning, her overconfidence would be her downfall. I noted every rumor, every shifted glance, adding them to my mental file like ammunition in a chamber. I realized I could crush her without even touching her, let her own web tangle her feet until she tripped hard. During a crucial pitch to seal a major contract, Madison interrupted me mid-sentence, her voice slicing in like a knife through butter. "What Elaine means is," she said smoothly, twisting my idea for the supply chain overhaul into hers with a few clever spins, making it sound like her brainchild all along. The client leaned forward, eyes lighting up at her fresh take, nodding along as she clicked through slides I'd originally designed. I stood there, words stuck in my throat like cotton, forcing a nod while rage boiled inside like water on a stove ready to overflow. The room clapped lightly at the end, the client shaking her hand first, mine second like an afterthought. Afterward, as the team filed out, she leaned close with that smirk. "See how easy it is when you let go? Youth brings innovation." Her eyes gleamed with victory, thinking she'd stolen another piece of my ground. But that whisper was the last straw, snapping something deep inside like a branch under storm weight. I was done letting go, done watching her chip away at my world with her sneaky games. It was time to start fighting back, to flip her script and watch her scramble in the mess she'd made. Even with the proof of my duplex purchase sitting in black and white, a deed I'd framed on my apartment wall, my family dismissed me like yesterday's news. Dad called one evening after seeing the article in the local paper about my first flip, his voice gruff over the line. "Elena, this real estate thing, it's cute, but Calvin's the one we count on for the big stuff. He's got the vision, the drive." I gripped the phone tighter, the words stinging like salt in fresh cuts, reopening old wounds from childhood where his praise for Calvin drowned out my quiet wins. Mom chimed in on speaker. "Don't get ahead of yourself, dear. We know you mean well." They didn't want to see me rise. It would expose how wrong they'd been all these years, betting on the golden boy while I scraped by in the shadows. That hurt more than anything, a betrayal deeper than Calvin's driveway laugh, like family ties were just strings they pulled to keep me small. I realized then their doubt was fuel, not chains. I hung up without arguing, whispering to myself in the empty room, "Then I'll stop asking for you to notice. Let them cling to their blind spots. I'd build in the light they couldn't dim." I contacted a lawyer friend, Kara, whom I hadn't spoken to in years since our college days, emailing her under catching up but slipping in questions about legal proof for financial disputes. Without naming Calvin, I asked what evidence would hold up in court, paper trails of loans, recordings of boasts, witnesses to thefts. She called back that afternoon, her voice crisp as fresh paper over the line. "Solid stuff. Bank statements showing unauthorized transfers, audio admissions of fraud, patterns of behavior from reliable sources," she said.
"Why?"
"You in trouble?" I laughed it off as helping a relative, but my heart pounded like a drum in a quiet storm. My folder already had all three, stacked from his stolen necklace pawn slip to the investment loans he'd never repaid. The pieces fit like a puzzle snapping complete, my plan no longer fantasy scribbled in anger, but a blueprint ready to build. Kara warned about risks, but I thanked her, hanging up with fire in my veins. But I wanted Calvin to feel the walls close in, slowly, like a noose tightening with each breath he took unaware, Let him strut a bit longer before the drop hit hard as truth. I moved into commercial real estate 6 months after that rainy night, flipping my first warehouse in a rundown Ohio district that others called a lost cause. I saw potential where they saw rust, gutted the insides, rewired for modern offices, and rented it out to startups hungry for cheap space. Word spread quick as gossip in a small town. City planners called for meetings. Investors slid cards across tables at luncheons. My network grew like wildfire through dry grass, names stacking in my phone like cards in a winning hand. I kept living humbly in my tiny apartment, no flashy cars or designer clothes, just quiet wins stacking higher. Calvin had no idea how far I'd come, still seeing me as the overlooked sister scraping by on diner tips. He bragged at family dinners about his big plans, eyes glazing over my updates like they were background noise. But my projects drew city attention now, headlines in local papers praising up-and-coming developer Elena Walsh. Reporters snapped photos at groundbreakings, my name bold in print. I smiled at the clips, clipping them from my scrapbook, until I overheard him boasting at a bar downtown one Friday night, slurring to buddies. One day, Elena'll be working for me, begging for a job in my empire. His laugh echoed like thunder in my chest. Months later, Calvin tried to start a business of his own, some half-baked app for local deals, funded with borrowed money from shady loans he hid from our parents. He pitched it hard at investor meetups, strutting in suits too tight for his ego, slides flashing numbers that didn't add up. But fate twisted sharp as a knife in the back. He targeted the same investors I was already partnered with on my warehouse flips. They called me privately after his presentation, voices chuckling over the line like old friends sharing a joke. Your brother's got guts, Elena, but his pitch? Laughable. Overpromised everything, backed by air. They laughed about his arrogance, how he name-dropped like confetti, clueless that I'd sealed deals with them months before. Thought you'd get a kick out of this, one said, emailing me his slide deck riddled with errors. I realized then I could crush him without even touching him. No direct hits, just quiet words in the right ears, letting his own bluster boomerang back. A whisper here, a doubt planted there, and his empire would crumble like sandcastles under tide. I hung up smiling, the power humming in my veins like electricity in wires. When our parents started talking about their estate over a quiet family dinner in Ohio, the air grew thick with unspoken tension, forks clinking like warnings on plates. Calvin sat tall at the head, assuming he'd inherit everything, the house, the savings, the family plot, as if it was his birthright etched in stone. He bragged loud about how he'd handle the family's legacy, spinning tales of investments he'd make, vacations he'd fund, his voice booming like he already owned it all. Everyone nodded along, Mom with her soft smile, Dad with a proud grunt, even his girlfriend hanging on every word like gospel. I stayed quiet in my corner seat, letting him dig his own grave deeper with each boast, his arrogance piling like dirt he'd soon choke on. He painted me out as the little sister who'd get a fair share, his laugh dismissing me like yesterday's news. The table fell silent when he finished, eyes turning expectant. But my father turned to me instead, his voice steady as old oak. What do you think, Elena? You've been quiet all night. The room froze, Calvin's smirk faltering like a crack in ice ready to shatter. For the first time in years, I spoke with authority at that family table, my voice rising clear and steady like a river breaking free from a dam. I listed my properties one by one. The duplex I'd flipped for double profit, the warehouse turned into rentals buzzing with tenants, my partnerships with investors who'd turn my ideas into gold mines. I've built this from nothing, I said, eyes meeting each face around the room, while working jobs you all called hobbies. The silence was deafening, thick as fog rolling in from the fields outside, no one daring to interrupt. Calvin's fork clattered onto his plate like a dropped weapon, his face paling as if I'd yanked the rug from under his throne. Mom's eyes widened, Dad leaned back with a slow nod, his girlfriend shifting uncomfortable in her chair. They saw me then, not the overlooked sister scraping by, but a force who'd risen quiet and strong. And then my mother whispered, barely above the tick of the clock, She's not the same Elena anymore. Her words hanging like a confession in the air, admitting what they'd all ignored for too long. Calvin's business fell apart within a year, crumbling like a sandcastle under a rising tide he never saw coming. He'd poured borrowed money into that flashy app idea, promising quick riches to anyone who'd listen, but the code glitches piled up like unpaid bills, users fleeing faster than rats from a sinking ship. Debts snowballed, creditors hounding his phone like wolves at the door, banks freezing accounts until his wallet echoed empty. He called our parents in panic, voice cracking like thin ice under weight, begging for bailouts they couldn't afford. Mom wired what she could scrape. Dad dipped into retirement scraps, but it was like pouring water into a sieve, gone in days to more fixes that fix nothing. The golden child's shine dimmed fast, his charm tarnished like cheap gold flaking off, friends ghosting calls, his girlfriend packing bags with a note saying, "I didn't sign up for this." Whispers spread through our small Ohio town. Calvin's washed up. I watched from afar, my own flips turning profits like clockwork, satisfaction brewing slow and sweet. But one evening, as I locked my office after sealing another deal, he showed up, begging at my door like a stray in the rain. He wanted me to bail him out, standing in my office doorway like a beggar with a crown he thought still fit. "Elena, just a loan. Family helps family, right?" he said, his voice pleading but edged with that old arrogance, like he expected my yes without question. He paced the room, spinning tales of bad luck and jealous haters sabotaging him, never owning the mess his lazy shortcuts made. I leaned back in my leather chair, the one I'd bought with my first big flip profit, remembering the rain that night he left me behind, his laugh echoing as taillights faded, my suitcase soaked in mud. "You left me behind, Calvin," I said, calm as still water, my eyes locked on his. "Why should I bring you forward now?" His jaw dropped like I'd slapped him, face reddening fast. He slammed his fist on my desk, the thud echoing like thunder in the quiet space, and shouted, "Because you owe me. I carried this family, always the star while you scraped by." The words hung heavy, his rage cracking the mask he'd worn so long. But I didn't flinch. This was my table now, and he was just a guest overstaying his welcome. I pretended to consider helping Calvin when he showed up at my duplex that night, his face twisted with desperation like a man who'd bet his last dollar and lost the pot. "Elena, just a loan to get me back on my feet," he begged, pacing my living room like a caged wolf, his voice cracking with the weight of his failures. I nodded slow, pulling out my laptop to draw up terms, interest rates high as a fence he'd never climb, documents laced with clauses that would tie him in knots. He signed without reading a word, too desperate to care, his pen scratching like a confession on paper. I smiled inside, watching him trap himself with his own arrogance, the ink drying like blood on a contract from hell. He leaned back after, relief flooding his face like he'd won the lottery. "Thanks, sis, you're a lifesaver." But as he grabbed his coat, I said softly, "Welcome to being the one left behind," my words hanging like a noose in the air. His smile faltered, confusion creasing his brow, but he laughed it off and left. Little did he know, those papers weren't salvation. They were the chains I'd forged from his own mockery, ready to pull tight when the time hit right. The turning point came months later at a family dinner, the air thick with tension like storm clouds ready to burst. Calvin sat slumped at the end of the table, his once boastful voice muted as he picked at his food. Overnight, after I'd quietly bought out his failing loans and properties through my growing network, the power dynamic had flipped like a card table overturned. He realized too late when the bank called him that morning. His assets now under my name, his empire, reduced to scraps I'd claimed as collateral. "Elena, what did you do?" he whispered across the mashed potatoes, eyes wide with shock like he'd been punched in the gut. All his arrogance crumbled in an instant, the golden boy looking small and lost for the first time. The family stared, Mom's forecovering, Dad's brow furrowed. I leaned forward and said, "You work for me now, Calvin. And you've failed at every chance I gave." His jaw unhinged, face paling like milk gone sour. He looked like he'd been punched twice over, the laughter he'd thrown at me now echoing back as silence. But I wasn't finished yet. There was one more twist to drive the lesson home. At our next family dinner, the air hung heavy with unspoken shifts, the long table set with Mom's best china, like a stage for the final act. Calvin sat at the end, slouched and silent, his once boastful voice muted as he poked at cold mashed potatoes. The golden boy looked dimmed, his eyes avoiding mine like I held a mirror to his failures. Everyone expected him to lead the toast as always, glass raised in his commanding grip, but when Dad cleared his throat and said, "Calvin," my brother just shrugged, mumbling something about not feeling it. The room went quiet, forks pausing midair, eyes darting like they sensed the ground moving. Then Dad turned to me, his voice soft but sure. "Elena, why don't you say grace this year?" I stood slowly, raising my glass high, every eye locking on me like spotlights I'd never felt before. The girl they left behind in the rain, suitcase soaked and heartbroken, was now the one guiding the family forward. "To new beginnings," I said, my voice steady as steel. Calvin sat slumped, silent, staring at his empty plate like it held his lost crown. And I realized this was only the beginning of my reign, the table mine at last. Weeks later, after Calvin's business fully tanked and his investors fled like rats from a flood, he tried one last jab at a casual coffee meetup he begged for. We sat in a dingy diner downtown, his face gaunt from stress, eyes hollow as empty wells. He leaned forward over his black coffee, voice low and bitter. "You got lucky, Elena. Stumbled into this real estate gig while I built real plans." His smirk twisted like old habit, thinking he'd sting me one more time, reduce me to the overlooked sister scraping by. But I leaned back, meeting his gaze steady, and laughed, louder than he ever had at me that rainy night, the sound booming from my chest like thunder rolling free. It cut through him sharp as a blade, his face turning red as boiled beets, mouth opening and closing speechless, like a fish yanked from water. The diner went quiet for a beat, heads turning our way. For once, I was the one laughing, and he was the one silent, his arrogance popped like a balloon under a pin. He stormed out without paying, but I stayed, sipping my tea slow, the victory tasting sweeter than any revenge I dreamed. Later that night, after the dishes clattered into the sink and the family laughter faded to quiet murmurs, my mother pulled me aside into the dimly lit hallway, her hand soft but firm on my arm like she feared I'd slip away. The house smelled of leftover turkey and pie, but the air between us hung heavy with unspoken regrets. She looked at me then, really looked, her eyes misty under the yellow glow of the lamp. "Elena, I've underestimated you all these years," she admitted, her voice cracking like old wood under weight, tears welling as she clutched her apron. "We all did, pushing Calvin forward while you built in the shadows. But now I see it clear as day. You're the true leader, steady and smart, the one holding things together when we turned blind." Tears stung my eyes hot and sharp, blurring her face, but I held them back fierce, blinking hard. I didn't want pity pouring like rain on my parade. I wanted respect, earned and solid, not handed like scraps from their table. She whispered then, leaning close, her breath warm on my cheek, "You're the one we should have trusted all along. Not the flash, but the fire that lasts." The words landed soft but deep, mending a crack I'd carried too long. Weeks later, after Calvin's loans defaulted and his empire crumbled to dust in bankruptcy court, he tried one last jab at a forced coffee meetup in a dingy Ohio diner, his face gaunt like a man who'd bet his soul and lost the pot. We sat across a sticky table, steam curling from cheap mugs, and he leaned forward with that old smirk twisted bitter. "You got lucky, Elena. Stumbled into this real estate gig while I planned real moves. Don't think it makes you better." His voice dripped venom, eyes narrowing like he could still cut me down to size. But I leaned back slow, meeting his gaze steady, and laughed, louder than he ever had at me that rainy night in the driveway, the sound booming from my chest like thunder rolling free after a storm held too long. It echoed off the diner's walls, heads turning our way, his face turning red as boiled beets under the fluorescent buzz. The laugh cut through him sharp as a blade through butter, leaving him red-faced and speechless, mouth opening like a fish gasping air, no words left in his arsenal. For once, I was the one laughing, and he was the one silent. His arrogance popped like a balloon under a pin, deflated and small. Looking back, I realized my revenge wasn't in one grand act that exploded like fireworks. It was in the patience, the quiet waiting like a spider in its web. In the silence where I watched Calvin's empire crumble, brick by stolen brick, while I rebuilt my own from the ashes he'd left. He stole my life, snatching the business, my reputation, even twisting Eric away like a thief in the night. But I took it back piece by piece, planting doubts like seeds in fertile soil, letting his own arrogance water them until they grew into choking vines. Now, as CEO, I led with the steady hand he'd mocked, turning his failures into my successes. My parents saw the truth at last, their pride in me a quiet bomb. Daniel, alone in his dim apartment, had nothing left to steal. No charm could buy back trust, no smirk could hide his emptiness. And when the moment was perfect, after years of his unchecked greed, I struck, not with rage that burns out fast, but with precision like a surgeon's blade, cutting away his illusions until only reality remained. He thought he'd won forever. Instead, he lost everything to the sister he underestimated. And I'd do it again, without hesitation, because some mistakes deserve to burn everything to the ground. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like this video, comment, and smash the subscribe button. Also check out other videos on the channel. Feminine Revenge has got more thrilling stories for you.